Rain hammered the highway as Jack Miller guided his old pickup through sheets of water that blurred the road into a river of headlights and spray. The storm had started just after sunset, and by the time it was 9:45 at night, the wipers were barely keeping up. Jack leaned forward against the wheel, eyes straining through the downpour, his hands steady in the way only years of combat and long drives had taught him. In the back seat, Emily slept curled beneath his faded marine jacket, her small fingers gripping a worn stuffed rabbit. The rise and fall of her breathing was the only calm thing in his world. She had cried herself to sleep after the funeral that afternoon, clinging to him, the way she had clung to her grandmother's hand in the hospital bed. Jack had promised his late wife that he would protect their daughter from every storm. But tonight the storm was bigger than weather. It was loneliness, grief, and the heavy silence of an empty passenger seat. The gas gauge needle had dipped below empty miles back, and when the flicker of a neon sign cut through the rain, Jack eased the truck under the buzzing lights of a forgotten gas station. The canopy rattled in the wind. Fluorescent tubes sputtered, casting pale blue light across cracked pavement. The place looked like a ghost of the 80s, but it was shelter and fuel, and that was enough. Jack killed the engine quietly so Emily wouldn't stir. He adjusted the jacket around her shoulders and watched her face for a moment, soft and untroubled in sleep. She looked so much like her mother, and for an instant he let himself rest in that memory before pulling the door shut against the rain. Inside the station, the air smelled of old coffee and cleaning solution. Behind the counter stood Melissa Cooper, early 30s, her name stitched into a plastic tag. She offered a tired smile, but Jack's eyes picked up the way her shoulders stayed squared, her feet balanced evenly, her gaze sliding to the convex mirror without really looking at it. She wasn't just a cashier. Something about her body language reminded him of briefing rooms and patrols overseas. He nodded back, choosing not to pry. He moved toward the coffee pot, its contents long burned but hot enough to keep him awake for the last stretch home. As he filled the paper cup, he cataloged details automatically, the way he had in uniform, the exit behind him, the blind spot near the restrooms, the old cameras blinking red in the corners. He had never been able to shut off that part of himself. He lifted the cup to his lips and nearly winced at the bitterness, but fatigue demanded it. The front door slammed open. Wind drove a burst of rain inside. Two men in ski masks rushed in with pistols raised, their voices sharp with nerves and rage. "Get on the ground." Everyone down. Melissa froze in place, her hands raised slowly, too calmly. An elderly woman by the dairy case gasped and dropped a gallon of milk that exploded across the linoleum. Jack instinctively stepped between her and the closest gunman, guiding her behind a rack of chips. His voice was low but commanding, the kind that once steadied young Marines under fire. "Stay down." The gun swung toward him, the man's finger twitching on the trigger. Outside, the storm beat against the truck. Emily shifted in her sleep, unaware that danger had stepped into her father's orbit once again. Jack's pulse steadied instead of racing. Every sense sharpened. The storm inside the store had only just begun. The taller of the two masked men vaulted the counter, shoving Melissa back toward the register, while his partner swung the pistol toward Jack and the old woman crouched behind the chips. The man barked for Jack to get on the ground. Jack kept his hands raised, but didn't move. His eyes tracked the muzzle, steady, unblinking. The robber's gaze slid to the tattoo visible under Jack's sleeve, the eagle and anchor worn from years of sun and sand. The man laughed, sharp and ugly, calling him a washed-up soldier. Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm, telling them to take the money and leave before anyone got hurt. The mockery only made the pistol waver closer. Jack's mind clicked into combat rhythm, the old training alive in his bones. He noted the distance to the wine rack, the way the gunman leaned forward, off balance. With one smooth step, he reached, snatched the heavy bottle, and swung it in a brutal arc. Glass shattered against the man's temple. The robber crumpled to the floor, the weapon clattering away. Before the second attacker could react, Jack drove a knee into the first man's ribs to keep him down, then turned, ready for the fight he knew was coming. But Melissa moved faster than anyone expected. Her hand shot beneath the cigarette shelf and came up with a compact Glock. Her draw was perfect, fluid, practiced. She fired twice into the second robber's chest. The man staggered back, crashing into the candy display, groaning as the impact knocked the pistol from his grip. Melissa advanced with precision, weapon steady, voice suddenly firm with authority. Jack froze, surprised at how professional she looked. She wasn't a cashier. She was trained. The realization hit a second before the store erupted with flashing lights and pounding boots. The front doors blew open, and agents in windbreakers swarmed inside, shouting commands, weapons sweeping corners. In seconds, the robbers were zip-tied and dragged out. Jack stood in the middle of it, breathing hard, the broken bottle still in his hand. Melissa pulled a badge from her pocket, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She holstered her weapon, eyes never leaving him. Jack's heart was still racing, but his face stayed hard. He had just saved lives, and yet the agents were closing in on him like he was a suspect. One demanded his name. Another asked why he intervened. Jack bristled at the accusations, repeating that he protected the woman and prevented a hostage situation. Flynn, the team leader, dismissed his explanation, saying he had compromised an undercover operation that had taken months to set up. Jack stared at Melissa, who now looked different in his eyes. She was part of something much larger than a gas station robbery, and he had just stumbled straight into the middle of it. Through the windows, rain still sheeted down. Outside, Emily slept on in the truck, unaware her father had just crossed a line that would change their lives. Jack's instincts had saved people tonight, but they had also pulled him into a fight he never wanted. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Jack's only thought after the chaos inside the gas station was to get back to his truck. Emily was still out there, asleep in the back seat, and he wanted nothing more than to drive away, disappear into the night, and pretend this stop had never happened. But before he could reach the door, Agent Flynn stepped into his path. Flynn was tall, lean, his windbreaker damp with rain, his tone clipped and sharp. He told Jack that civilians who interfered in federal operations complicated months of work. Jack pushed back, his voice steady but edged with anger, reminding him that people could have died if he had done nothing. Flynn didn't flinch. To him, Jack was a liability, not a savior. Melissa cut in, her voice calm but firm, saying that Jack's quick reaction had prevented a hostage situation. She pointed out the way he had read the room in seconds, the speed of his disarm, and the discipline in his movements. Flynn ignored her, already signaling to another agent to take Jack's statement. The questions felt less like gathering information and more like a cross-examination. Jack bristled, repeating that he was a mechanic, a father, nothing more. He had no interest in their sting, their war on drugs, or whatever else this mess was. Flynn finally waved him off, but not without a warning that involvement in federal matters came with consequences. Jack didn't answer. He pushed out into the rain, walking fast across the lot. Relief washed through him when he saw Emily still curled in the back seat, safe and untouched. He slipped behind the wheel, started the engine, and told himself it was over. But Melissa wasn't done. She appeared at his window before he could shift into gear, rain streaking across her face, her voice lowered. She asked him for a minute, and something in her tone made him pause. She leaned in and told him this wasn't just about drugs or two desperate robbers. The garage tied to the men they had arrested had been driving legitimate auto shops into the ground. Morrison's, the place where Jack worked, was barely staying afloat. Stark Auto Garage across town was their competitor, undercutting prices with fake repairs, inflated invoices, and laundered money. It was the same garage now linked to the cartel pipeline. If it kept going, Morrison's would close. Good people would lose jobs. Emily's future, already fragile, would be hit again. Jack gripped the wheel tighter. He told her none of that was his problem. He had done his part. He had saved a woman's life. He wanted no more. Melissa pressed. She told him they needed eyes that understood cars, modifications, fraud disguised as repairs. They needed someone who wasn't in their system, someone the criminals wouldn't recognize. She said he could spot details they'd miss. For a long moment, Jack stared past her into the storm. He thought of Emily's face when she asked about violin lessons he couldn't afford. He thought of the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table and the promise he had made to his wife on her deathbed to keep their daughter safe, to give her more than survival. Melissa's words dug into that promise, turning it over inside him. Finally, he let out a breath and said he would help for one night. Just one. No guns, no firefights, no danger. Observation only. His daughter was his only priority. Melissa nodded and slipped a small card through the crack in the window. It was blank, except for a number written in black ink. She told him to call when he was ready. Then she stepped back, disappearing into the rain. Jack pulled away, headlights cutting through the storm. Emily stirred and mumbled in her sleep, clutching the rabbit tighter. He whispered that everything was fine, though he didn't believe it himself. Deep down, he knew he had just stepped into something he couldn't walk away from so easily. The alliance had begun, whether he wanted it or not. The night was quiet except for the low hum of traffic on the distant highway. Jack crouched beside Melissa in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, eyes fixed on Stark Auto Garage across the street. The place was alive even though the clock on his watch read 11:30 or 11:30 at night. Too much activity for a Tuesday. Expensive cars slipped in and out of the lot, their headlights cutting through the chain-link fence before vanishing into the bay doors. Jack muttered that a $100,000 Mercedes didn't belong in a neighborhood where half the houses had boarded windows. Melissa frowned but said nothing, watching through her binoculars. Jack's gaze sharpened. He noticed the mechanics weren't fumbling or disorganized like real workers. They moved with drill precision, stripping panels, swapping parts, then rolling the vehicles out looking slightly different than when they came in. He pointed out the lowered suspensions, reinforced tires, and the speed of the transformations. He told Melissa these weren't repairs. They were modifications meant to hide compartments. She stiffened, realizing he was probably right. Then a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. Jack leaned forward, his stomach sinking as he recognized the man who stepped out. Oliver Grant, senior FBI. The same agent who had scolded him back at the gas station, walked casually toward the garage owner. Zane Dermott. They shook hands like old friends. An aluminum briefcase changed hands, and Jack knew instantly what it meant. He whispered to Melissa that one of her own was working with them. Melissa froze. For a moment, disbelief warred with the evidence in front of her. She had defended Oliver in meetings, trusted him in operations. Now she watched him pocket an envelope and slip back into the car. Her hand tightened on the radio. Jack told her if she called it in now, Oliver would hear and bury everything. She lowered the radio slowly, her jaw tense, with no proof beyond what they had seen. She aborted the raid. They stayed in the shadows as the sedan disappeared into the night. Melissa's silence was heavy, her loyalty shaken. Jack exhaled hard, knowing he was already in deeper than he wanted. What was supposed to be one night of observation had revealed something worse than cartel money. The rot was inside the bureau itself, and neither of them could walk away now. The Stark auto garage glowed like a fortress under the floodlights. Jack crouched beside Melissa behind a stack of rusting containers. His phone camera zoomed on the open bay where crates of cash and powder were being loaded into trucks. It was close to 12:15 or 12:15 at night, and every shadow in the place seemed alive. Jack's hands were steady as he recorded, his mind cataloging every plate number, every hidden compartment on the cars being pushed through. This was evidence, the kind they could take to court. For a moment he thought, maybe, just maybe, they could get out without anyone knowing they were there. Then he heard it, a muffled cry, high-pitched, unmistakable. His blood ran cold. He would know that sound anywhere. Emily. He didn't wait. He shoved the phone into his pocket and moved toward the office at the back of the garage, Melissa hissing at him to stop. But nothing could stop him now. His boots barely touched the ground as he pushed through the side door. Inside the office, the world narrowed to a nightmare. Emily was tied to a chair, wrists bound with zip ties, her pajamas torn, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. Her cheeks were streaked with tears. Standing beside her was Ronnie, one of the thugs from the gas station, bruised but alive, smirking as if he had been waiting for this. And behind him, leaning against the desk with calm arrogance, was Oliver Grant. His FBI badge still hung around his neck, a mockery of everything it was supposed to stand for. Jack's face stayed calm, but his chest felt like it was splitting. He crouched down just enough for Emily to see him and whispered for her to close her eyes, telling her it would all be over soon. She sobbed and obeyed, pressing her face into the rabbit's fur. Oliver's voice was smooth, practiced. He told Jack to walk away. He said there was $50,000 in cash waiting if he took his daughter and left. He promised they would be unharmed if Jack played smart. Jack straightened, his jaw set, his eyes locked on Oliver's. He said, 73. That was how many kids had died from overdoses tied to Oliver's pipeline in the past year. 73 families destroyed so he could line his pockets. Oliver's smile faltered, but he raised his gun anyway. Jack moved. The pocket knife was already in his hand, the same knife his wife had given him on his last deployment. He flicked it open and cut through Emily's bonds in one sweep, pulling her into his arms and turning his back to shield her from the gun. Ronnie lunged, but Jack pivoted and slammed his shoulder into him, sending the man crashing into a file cabinet. Melissa burst through the door a second later, her weapon drawn. She fired, the shot hitting Oliver in the arm. His gun spun across the floor as he screamed, clutching the wound. Jack pressed Emily against his chest, his body between her and everything else, while Melissa kicked the weapon out of reach and dragged Ronnie down with a knee to his spine. Outside, chaos erupted as black SUVs screeched into the lot. The real FBI, the ones Melissa had secretly called, stormed the garage. Flashlights cut through the darkness, agents shouting commands, men being slammed to the floor and cuffed. The entire operation collapsed in a storm of arrests and evidence markers. Through it all, Jack barely moved. He held Emily close, whispering that she was safe, that Daddy wasn't going anywhere. She clung to him so tightly it hurt, but he didn't care. The fight was done. The garage echoed with the sound of victory and pain, but in Jack's arms, Emily's trembling breaths slowly evened out. When it was over, Melissa glanced at him, blood and sweat streaking her face, but her eyes held gratitude. Jack didn't look back at her. His focus was on Emily, on the promise he had kept. He had fought not as a Marine, not as a soldier, but as a father. And for the first time that night, he let himself believe they might make it through. Oliver Grant was led out in handcuffs, his badge still dangling against his chest like a broken promise. By dawn, the garage was swarming with agents cataloging drugs, money, and cars that would never reach the streets again. Melissa told Jack the network was finished, that Oliver had given up names and dates to save himself. Jack barely listened. He was too focused on Emily, still holding her close, her stuffed rabbit crushed between them. For him, the only victory was that she was safe. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Jack's small house. It was official, full of words like commendation and reward. Along with it came a check, more money than he had seen in his life. It was enough to pay down debts, to put something aside for Emily's future, and to cover the violin lessons she had dreamed of, but never asked for. Jack stared at the check for a long time, torn between gratitude and discomfort. He didn't feel like a hero. He only felt like a father trying to keep a promise. 3 months passed, and the air turned warm again. On a Saturday evening at 6:00 or 6 o'clock, Jack sat in the front row of a crowded school auditorium, his phone raised to capture every note as Emily played her first recital. She stood small and determined under the bright lights, her bow trembling slightly at first, then growing steadier with each measure. The melody filled the room, clear and hopeful. Jack's chest ached with pride. When the final note faded, the applause thundered. Jack wiped at his eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. Emily spotted him in the crowd and grinned, her face shining with joy. As he pushed through the audience to reach her, Melissa appeared at his side, holding a bouquet of fresh flowers. Emily gasped with delight and hugged her. Melissa had stayed in touch, always just a call away, and now she was here like family. Later, in the bustle of the reception, Emily tugged on Jack's sleeve and whispered with all the seriousness of an 8-year-old that she wanted to know if Melissa was his girlfriend. Jack laughed, caught off guard. He started to explain, but Emily cut him off with a shrug and said she made him smile. And that was enough. Jack felt something shift inside him, the weight of guilt easing, replaced by the fragile hope that maybe, after everything, they could build something new. That summer, Jack, Emily, and Melissa walked the shoreline of a quiet beach, the sun setting in streaks of gold and crimson. Emily ran ahead, chasing waves, her laughter carried on the wind. Jack and Melissa walked side by side, not needing words. For the first time in years, he felt more than survival. He felt the possibility of a future. Jack had been a Marine. He had been a mechanic. But standing there, with the ocean before him and his daughter safe at his side, he understood what he was meant to be. A father who fought for what mattered most. Sometimes heroism wasn't about medals or battles. Sometimes it was as simple as keeping a promise to the people you love. And in that moment, as the waves rolled in and the sky darkened to stars, Jack Miller finally believed that was enough.